Marcus Chen had seen plenty of strange things during his 20 years as a wildlife wrangler on the frontier planet Xerion 7. Three-headed serpents that could split light into rainbows, crystal birds that sang in mathematical equations, and even the infamous shadow cats that existed in 2 dimensions at once. But nothing had prepared him for what he found in the abandoned mining shaft that Tuesday morning. The distress signal had been weak, almost buried under the static of Xerion's magnetic storms. Most people would have ignored it, written it off, as equipment malfunction from one of the hundreds of dead mining operations scattered across the planet's surface. But Marcus had learned to trust his instincts, and something about the signal's rhythm felt organic, almost like a heartbeat. The shaft entrance was partially collapsed, jagged metal beams twisted like broken fingers against the purple sky. Marcus checked his equipment one more time. Tranquilizer gun, emergency medical kit, portable habitat generator, and his grandfather's lucky wrench that had never failed him. The wrench was more superstition than tool, but in his line of work, you took luck wherever you found it. As he descended into the darkness, his headlamp cut through layers of dust and debris. The walls were scored with strange marks, too regular to be natural erosion, but too organic to be machine-made. The temperature dropped with each step, and his breath began to fog in the thin air. The distress signal grew stronger, accompanied now by something else, a soft rhythmic thumping that made his chest vibrate. 50 meters down, Marcus found the source of both sounds. In a natural cavern that the miners had accidentally broken, into dozens of scaled creatures no bigger than house cats huddled together in a living carpet of distress. Their scales shifted from deep emerald to bright gold as they sensed his light, and when they turned toward him, their eyes held an intelligence that made Marcus's blood run cold. Dragons. Baby dragons. The things that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, that had destroyed entire star systems in their adult rage, that had forced humanity to develop faster than light travel just to escape their wrath. And here were their children, abandoned and dying in a hole in the ground. Marcus counted at least 40 hatchlings, their tiny wings folded against bodies that trembled with cold and hunger. Some were barely moving, their golden eyes dimmed to amber. Others mewled softly, a sound that tugged at something deep in Marcus's chest despite every survival instinct screaming at him to run. The smart thing would be to contact the Galactic Council immediately. They had protocols for dragon encounters, orbital bombardment followed by planetary quarantine. No exceptions, no questions asked. The galaxy had learned that lesson the hard way on 17 different worlds. But as Marcus watched one particularly small hatchling struggle to lift its head, its scales flickering between colors like a dying rainbow, he found himself moving forward instead of backing away. His grandfather had always said that the measure of a person wasn't what they did when it was easy, but what they did when it was impossible. Attempting to save baby dragons definitely qualified as impossible. The hatchlings didn't flee as he approached. If anything, they seemed to press closer together, their collective warmth creating small clouds of steam in the cold air. Marcus knelt at the edge of their huddle, close enough to see the intricate patterns of their scales, the tiny claws that could probably cut through steel, the miniature horns that would one day grow large enough to gore a starship. One hatchling, slightly larger than the others and bearing scales of deep purple shot through with silver, separated itself from the group. It approached Marcus with halting steps, its head tilted in curiosity rather than fear. When it reached, his gloved hand it sniffed delicately, then made a sound somewhere between a purr and a whistle. Marcus felt his heart break and heal at the same time. These weren't the monsters of galactic nightmares. They were just babies, alone and afraid, abandoned by whatever catastrophe had left them here. The mining equipment around the cavern was old, probably from the initial surveys decades ago. The mother dragon was long gone, and these hatchlings had somehow survived on whatever they could find in the depths. "Hey there, little one," Marcus whispered, slowly extending his finger toward the purple hatchling. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The hatchling touched its snout to his glove, and Marcus felt a shock of warmth travel up his arm. Not heat from fire, but something deeper, more fundamental. For just a moment he could sense the creature's emotions: confusion, loneliness, hope, and underneath it all, a fierce determination to survive that reminded him uncomfortably of humanity's own stubborn refusal to give up. When the connection faded, Marcus was left staring into eyes that held more wisdom than any creature that young should possess. The hatchling whistled again, softer this time, and several others began to approach. Within minutes, Marcus found himself surrounded by baby dragons, all of them watching him with the same mixture of hope and desperation. He activated his comm unit, then hesitated with his finger over the emergency council frequency. Once he made that call, these creatures would be dead within hours. The Galactic Council didn't negotiate with dragons, not even baby ones. They'd learned that mercy toward dragons was just delayed extinction for everyone else, but Marcus had spent his entire adult life saving creatures that others had written off as hopeless. He'd successfully relocated the acid-spitting wolverines of Kepler 442, established breeding programs for the near-extinct crystal whales of the Vale Nebula, and even managed to domesticate the supposedly untamable lightning foxes of New Terra. Dragons, though. Dragons were different. Dragons were impossible. Marcus looked around at the 40 pairs of hopeful eyes watching him, at the tiny creatures who had somehow survived against all odds in this forgotten hole in the ground. He thought about his grandfather's wrench, about taking luck wherever you found it, about the difference between what was smart and what was right. Then he switched his comm unit to a different frequency entirely. "This is Marcus Chen, Wildlife Specialist License 77 Alpha. I need an emergency supply drop at my current coordinates, milk substitute, thermal units, and a Class 5 portable habitat. And Sarah?" He paused, knowing his partner would think he'd finally lost his mind. "You're going to want to clear your schedule for the next few months. We've got ourselves a project." Sarah Martinez had worked with Marcus Chen for 8 years, and in that time she'd learned to expect the unexpected. When he called requesting an emergency supply drop, she didn't ask questions. When he asked for enough milk substitute to feed a small army, she raised an eyebrow but started placing orders. But when he casually mentioned clearing her schedule for months, she knew something was seriously wrong. The supply drop took 6 hours to organize and deliver. Marcus spent that time in the cavern with the hatchlings, slowly earning their trust. The purple one he'd first encountered seemed to have appointed itself as spokesperson for the group. It would approach him, make a series of whistles and chirps, then return to the others as if reporting back. By the time Sarah's shuttle arrived, Marcus had managed to get most of the hatchlings to accept water from his emergency rations. The smallest ones were weak enough that he had to help them drink, supporting their tiny heads with infinite patience. Their scales were warm to the touch, not the burning heat he'd expected, but a gentle warmth like sunlight on stone. Sarah's voice crackled through his comm. "Marcus, I'm reading some strange energy signatures down there. What exactly am I dropping supplies to?" Marcus looked around at the cavern full of baby dragons, all of them now watching the cavern entrance with curious intensity. The larger ones had positioned themselves protectively around the smaller ones, forming natural barriers with their bodies. Even as infants, their tactical instincts were remarkable. "Sarah, I need you to land about 100 meters from the shaft entrance and wait. Don't come down here until I give the all clear." "And Sarah?" Marcus paused, knowing this would change everything between them. "What I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane, but I need you to trust me. Marcus Chen, you are scaring me. Just tell me what's down there." "Dragons. Baby dragons. 43 of them to be exact." The comm went silent for so long that Marcus checked to make sure the connection hadn't been severed. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled, the tone she used when dealing with panicked colonists. "Marcus, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You need to back away from whatever you think you're seeing and get out of there immediately. Dragon encounters cause hallucinations, memory distortions. It's well documented. Just climb up here and we'll figure this out together." Marcus had expected this reaction. In Sarah's position, he would have said the same thing. Dragon sightings were reported regularly across the galaxy, but they always turned out to be misidentified creatures, hoaxes, or stress-induced hallucinations. Real dragons were the stuff of historical records and nightmare stories. "Sarah, I'm sending you video feed from my helmet cam. Just watch for 30 seconds before you decide I've lost my mind." Marcus activated the video transmission and slowly panned his camera across the cavern. The hatchlings had grown more active as the warmth from his portable heater spread through the space. Several were attempting to groom each other with tiny tongues, their scales shifting to warmer colors in the improved environment. The purple hatchling was investigating Marcus's emergency pack, its head tilted as it examined each item with scientific curiosity. The silence from Sarah's end stretched longer this time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Those are actually dragons. Baby dragons," Marcus corrected. "Abandoned, starving, and completely dependent on us for survival. The council protocol would be to eliminate them immediately, but Sarah, look at them. Really look at them. They're not monsters. They're just scared children." Through his video feed, Sarah watched as one of the smaller hatchlings stumbled and was immediately supported by two larger ones. The three creatures arranged themselves so the weak one could rest between them, sharing their body heat without being asked. It was a display of empathy and cooperation that contradicted everything the galaxy believed about dragons. "Marcus, even if they're not aggressive now, they won't stay small forever. Adult dragons are planet killers, literally. We've seen the wreckage they leave behind." Marcus had spent the past 6 hours thinking about the same problem. Adult dragons were indeed capable of unimaginable destruction. The historical records were clear. 13 inhabited worlds completely sterilized, millions of lives lost, entire star systems abandoned out of fear. But those records were also centuries old, from the early days of galactic expansion when humanity was young and dragons were already ancient. What if the aggression isn't natural? Marcus asked. What if it's learned behavior? Think about it, Sarah. Every dragon that humanity has encountered has been wild, probably driven from its territory, defending itself against creatures it sees as invaders. But these hatchlings have never known conflict. They've only known abandonment and survival. The purple hatchling had discovered Marcus's energy bars and was sniffing them with great interest. When Marcus offered a small piece, the creature accepted it delicately, chewed thoughtfully, then made an approving chirp and ran back to share with the others. Within minutes, several hatchlings were approaching Marcus hopefully, their eyes bright with anticipation. "They're learning trust," Marcus continued, watching the tiny creatures organize themselves into a polite line. "They're learning that not all aliens are threats. Sarah, what if we could raise them differently? What if we could prove that dragons don't have to be monsters?" Sarah's shuttle landed with a soft thud that echoed down the shaft. Through his video feed, Marcus could see her in the pilot's seat, her hands gripping the controls as she stared at the impossible scene in the cavern below. "Marcus, this is the most dangerous thing anyone has ever attempted. If the Galactic Council finds out what we're doing, they'll classify us as dragon sympathizers. That's an automatic death sentence. And if we fail, if even one of these creatures turns aggressive, we could be responsible for another planetary genocide." Marcus knew she was right. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to call the council and let them handle the situation according to established protocol. But as he watched the hatchling sharing his energy bar with careful precision, making sure the smallest ones got their fair share, he couldn't bring himself to make that call. "I know the risks," he said finally, "but Sarah, I've spent my entire career believing that no creature is beyond saving. These dragons aren't just another species on the edge of extinction. They're the most intelligent creatures in the galaxy, and they're babies. If we can prove they can be raised peacefully, we could change everything. We could end the dragon wars forever." One of the smallest hatchlings had fallen asleep against Marcus's boot, its tiny body radiating contentment and trust. The others had arranged themselves in a protective circle around it, their scales glowing softly in the dim light. It was a scene of such innocent vulnerability that Marcus felt his resolve strengthen. "I need an answer, Sarah. Are you with me on this impossible thing, or do I contact the council now?" Sarah stared at her video feed for a long moment, watching as the purple hatchling began grooming the sleeping one with gentle precision. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady despite the magnitude of what she was agreeing to. "Damn it, Marcus. You know I can't let you do this alone, but we're going to need help, real help. And we're going to need somewhere safe to raise 43 baby dragons without the entire galaxy noticing." Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the shaft. "I was hoping you'd say that. Because I think I know exactly where to take them." The abandoned research station on Kepler 438b had been Marcus's secret project for 3 years. Officially, the station had been destroyed in a meteor strike and written off by the Galactic Survey Corps. Unofficially, Marcus had been slowly rebuilding it as a private sanctuary for creatures that couldn't be relocated anywhere else in civilized space. The station sat in the middle of a vast crystalline forest, where the trees grew like frozen lightning and sang in the wind. The planet was technically uninhabitable by galactic standards. Too much radiation, too little oxygen, storms that could strip paint from a starship's hull. But for creatures that had evolved in extreme environments, it was perfect. Moving 43 baby dragons across 3 star systems without detection required more creativity than Marcus and Sarah had used in their entire careers combined. They couldn't use official transport channels, and civilian shipping would ask too many questions about the massive life support requirements. In the end, they borrowed a decommissioned mining hauler from Marcus's cousin, a woman who asked no questions as long as the rental fee was paid in advance. The hatchlings adapted to space travel better than Marcus had dared hope. They seemed to find the gentle hum of the ship's engines soothing, and the zero-gravity environment allowed the weakest ones to move around freely for the first time since he'd found them. They organized themselves into small family groups, with the larger hatchlings taking responsibility for the smaller ones in a display of social structure that fascinated Sarah. The purple hatchling, who Sarah had started calling Scout for its tendency to explore every inch of their cargo hold, had appointed itself as liaison between the dragons and humans. It would approach them when the others needed something, perform an elaborate pantomime to communicate the problem, then lead them to wherever help was needed. During the 3-day journey, Marcus and Sarah learned more about dragon behavior than the scientific community had discovered in centuries of study. The hatchlings were incredibly intelligent, picking up basic concepts after only 1 or 2 demonstrations. They learned to use the ship's water dispensers within hours, figured out how to operate the lighting controls by the 2nd day, and had started experimenting with the emergency communication system by day 3. They're not just smart, Sarah observed, watching a group of hatchlings work together to reach a food dispenser that had been mounted too high. They're collaborative smart. Look at how they're planning this. 3 hatchlings had formed a living pyramid, with the smallest one climbing to the top, but instead of immediately going for the food, the top hatchling was testing the dispenser's weight, making sure it wouldn't fall and hurt anyone. When it was satisfied the mechanism was secure, it carefully operated the controls and passed food down to waiting claws below. It's like they're naturally designed for cooperation, Marcus agreed. Maybe that's why adult dragons are so dangerous when they're isolated. Social creatures can become aggressive when they're cut off from their community. The research station's automated systems came online as their ship approached, Kepler 438b. Marcus had spent months upgrading the facility's life support, expanding the habitat areas, and installing enough security to keep unwanted visitors away. The station could support up to 100 large creatures indefinitely, drawing power from the planet's unique crystalline formations. As they prepared for landing, the hatchlings seemed to sense that something important was happening. They gathered around the cargo hold's small viewports, their eyes wide as they took in their first sight of the crystal forest below. Their scales shifted through a spectacular array of colors, reflecting and refracting the strange light that filtered through the planet's atmosphere. Scout approached Marcus and performed its usual attention-getting whistle, then pointed toward the viewports and made a questioning trill. The other hatchlings joined their voices to the query, creating a harmony that vibrated through the ship's hull. "I think they're asking if this is home," Sarah translated. Marcus knelt beside Scout and gently touched its snout, feeling again that strange warmth and connection he'd experienced in the mining shaft. This time, though, he tried to project his own emotions back: safety, hope, belonging. Scout's eyes widened and it made a soft, contented sound that was quickly echoed by the others. "Yes," Marcus said aloud, knowing they probably couldn't understand his words but hoping they could sense his meaning. "This is home." The station's landing bay was exactly as Marcus had left it, clean and spacious with multiple airlocks leading to different habitat zones. He'd designed the facility with modularity in mind, knowing that different species would have different needs. For the dragons, he'd prepared the largest habitat, a vast dome that replicated the crystal forest environment outside, complete with artificial weather systems and temperature gradients. But as the hatchlings emerged from the ship, Marcus realized he'd made several miscalculations. The dragons weren't interested in staying in their designated habitat. Instead, They spread out through the entire station, exploring every corridor, every room, every piece of equipment with insatiable curiosity. They're mapping the place, Sarah realized, watching as small groups split off to investigate different areas. Look at how systematic they're being. They're not just wandering randomly. She was right. The hatchlings were conducting a thorough reconnaissance of their new home, and they were doing it with military precision. Scout was coordinating the exploration, sending groups to specific areas and then reconvening to share information through a complex series of whistles, chirps, and scale color changes. Within 2 hours, the dragons had thoroughly explored the station and made their preferences clear. They didn't want to be confined to a single habitat. Instead, they'd claimed the entire facility as their territory, with different groups establishing themselves in different areas based on their individual needs and personalities. The more adventurous hatchlings claimed the observation deck, where they could watch the crystal forest through massive, transparent aluminum windows. The cautious ones preferred the lower levels where the corridors were smaller and easier to defend. The smallest ones had discovered the station's central hub, where the gentle hum of the main computer system seemed to soothe them. "This isn't what I planned," Marcus admitted, watching as a group of hatchlings figured out how to operate the station's internal transport system. "I thought we'd be taking care of them. Instead, they're taking over." Sarah laughed, the first truly relaxed sound she'd made since this whole adventure began. "Marcus, they're not taking over. They're making it home. There's a difference." As if to prove her point, Scout approached them carrying something in its small claws. When it reached Marcus, it carefully placed a small crystal formation at his feet, a fragment of the planet's native geology that it had somehow collected during their initial exploration. The gesture was unmistakably a gift, offered with the same careful dignity that the hatchlings had shown when sharing food. Scout whistled softly, touched its snout to Marcus's hand one more time, then bounded away to rejoin its family. Marcus picked up the crystal, feeling its strange warmth against his palm. The faceted surface reflected his image in dozens of fragments, each one showing a slightly different angle, a slightly different possibility. "You know what the really impossible part is?" he said to Sarah, watching as the hatchlings continued to explore their new home with undiminished enthusiasm. "What's that?" Marcus smiled, thinking about the months and years ahead, about the challenges they'd face as the dragons grew larger and more complex, about the delicate balance they'd need to maintain between giving the creatures freedom and keeping the galaxy safe. "The impossible part isn't raising baby dragons. The impossible part is going to be letting them go when they're ready to make their own choices about what kind of dragons they want to be." 6 months after arriving at the research station, Marcus woke to find Scout perched on his desk, carefully arranging his morning coffee cup, data pad, and reading glasses in a precise pattern. The young dragon had grown considerably, now about the size of a medium dog, but its intelligence had grown even faster. "Good morning to you too," Marcus said, accepting the coffee that Scout had somehow learned to prepare exactly to his preferences. The dragon's scales shimmered with pleasure at the acknowledgement, cycling through warm golds and satisfied blues. The growth rate of all 43 hatchlings had surprised both humans. Dragon development apparently wasn't linear. They would remain relatively small for months, then undergo rapid growth spurts that transformed them almost overnight. Scout was among the fastest developers, showing not just physical changes but increasingly complex behaviors. Sarah emerged from the main lab, her hair disheveled and her expression mixing exhaustion with excitement. She'd been working for weeks on something she called Project Communication, and Marcus could tell from her face that she'd made a breakthrough. "Marcus, you need to see this." "Scout, tell him about yesterday's lesson." Scout straightened to its full height, which now brought its head level with Marcus's chest. The dragon cleared its throat with a small puff of steam. Not flame, but warm, moist air that carried a surprising range of scents. Then, in carefully modulated sounds that were unmistakably attempts at human speech, Scout said, "Hello, Marcus." "Good morning. I am Scout." Marcus nearly dropped his coffee cup. They'd suspected the dragons were trying to imitate human speech, but this was the first time any of them had produced recognizable words. "They've been listening to everything we say," Sarah explained, her scientific excitement barely contained. "Not just listening, analyzing. Scout has been practicing pronunciation for weeks, working out how to shape sounds with vocal structures that are completely different from ours." Scout nodded enthusiastically, pleased with the attention. I learn words. Other dragons learn words. We talk with Marcus and Sarah. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. If the dragons could learn human languages, they could communicate their thoughts, their intentions, their needs. But more importantly, they could explain themselves to the galaxy. They could participate in their own defense if the time came. How many words does Scout know? Marcus asked. Show him, Sarah encouraged. For the next 10 minutes, Scout demonstrated a vocabulary of nearly 200 words, along with basic grammar concepts and the ability to form simple sentences. The dragon's pronunciation was careful and deliberate, with occasional pauses to work out particularly difficult sounds. Other dragons learn different fast, Scout explained. Small ones learn fast, big ones more careful. Purple and gold female very smart with numbers. Red striped male good with machine sounds. Marcus felt a chill of possibility mixed with terror. If Scout was representative of dragon intelligence, they weren't dealing with clever animals. They were dealing with a species that might be more intelligent than humans. Scout, can you tell me what you remember from before we found you? The dragon's scales shifted to darker colors, patterns that Sarah had learned to associate with concentration and memory recall. Remember cold. Remember hungry. Remember Mother Voice before the silent time. Remember waiting for Mother Voice to return. What did Mother Voice tell you? Mother Voice said star people were dangerous. Said to hide if star people came. Said star people make bad fire and break sky homes. Scout's scales flickered with what Marcus had learned to recognize as confusion. But Marcus and Sarah are star people. Marcus and Sarah make warm safe, make food sharing, make word learning. Mother Voice was wrong about star people? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge to everything the galaxy believed about dragon-human relations. If Scout's memories were accurate, the adult dragons weren't just defending territory. They were protecting their young from what they perceived as a genocidal threat. Some star people are dangerous, Marcus said carefully. Some star people make bad fire and break sky homes. But not all star people. Some star people want to help. Scout considered this for a long moment, its scales cycling through complex patterns that Sarah was still learning to interpret. Some dragons dangerous too? It asked finally. The honesty of the question took Marcus's breath away. Scout wasn't just learning language, it was learning to think critically about its own species, to consider the possibility that the conflicts between dragons and humans weren't entirely one-sided. I don't know, Marcus admitted. Maybe some dragons are dangerous. Maybe some dragons learned to be dangerous because they were afraid. Fear makes bad choices, Scout agreed, and Marcus wondered if he was listening to the voice of the future. A generation of dragons that could choose cooperation over conflict. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent chime from the station's communication system. Sarah's expression went from excited to worried as she checked the incoming message. Marcus, we have a problem. There's a Galactic Council survey ship requesting permission to land. They're claiming routine inspection authority. Marcus felt the familiar weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. The Council had no legal right to inspect a private research station, but they had the firepower to enforce their will regardless of legality. If they discovered the dragons, 43 young lives would end in orbital bombardment. How long until they arrive? He asked. 4 hours, maybe 5 if we're lucky. Scout had been following their conversation with obvious comprehension. Now the young dragon moved closer to Marcus, its scales shifting to protective patterns. Star people with bad fire coming? Maybe, Marcus said. We need to hide you and the others. Somewhere safe where the bad star people won't find you. But Scout shook its head, a gesture it had learned by watching humans. No hiding. Other dragons need to know. Need to choose. Before Marcus could ask what the dragon meant, Scout raised its head and produced a sound unlike anything Marcus had heard before. A complex, melodic call that resonated through the station's walls and seemed to reach into every corner of the facility. Within minutes, dragons began arriving in the main lab. Not just the largest ones, but representatives from every family group in the station. They arranged themselves in a rough circle, with Scout at the center, and began what could only be described as a conference. The communication was unlike anything in human experience. The dragons used vocalizations, scale color changes, body positioning, and scent markers in a complex symphony of meaning that conveyed far more information than human speech could manage. Marcus and Sarah could only watch in amazement as their young charges conducted a democratic debate about their own future. After nearly an hour of discussion, Scout turned back to Marcus. Its scales had settled into patterns of determination and resolution. "We choose no hiding," the young dragon announced. "We choose meeting star people with truth-telling. If star people with bad fire want to make ending, we show that dragons can choose not war." Marcus stared at the circle of young dragons, all of them watching him with eyes that held courage beyond their months of existence. They were choosing to risk everything on the hope that truth could triumph over fear. "Scout, if they don't listen, if they choose bad fire anyway, then dragons die choosing peace instead of war," Scout replied simply. "Better ending than Mother Voice way. Better beginning for star people and dragon people together." Marcus looked at Sarah, seeing his own mixture of terror and pride reflected in her eyes. Their impossible project had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. The dragons had learned more than language and cooperation. They had learned wisdom. Now all they had to do was convince the Galactic Council that baby dragons could be something other than a death sentence for the galaxy. Admiral Thorne stepped off her shuttle with the confident stride of someone who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with superior firepower. Her security detail spread out behind her, weapons ready, scanners active. The 40-year veteran of the Dragon Wars had personally overseen the sterilization of 3 worlds, and her reputation for absolute adherence to Council protocol was legendary. Marcus met them at the landing bay, his hands visible and empty, his posture carefully non-threatening. Behind him, Scout waited with the patient dignity that the young dragon had been practicing for hours. The other dragons were hidden throughout the station, ready to appear on Scout's signal. "Dr. Chen," Admiral Thorne said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to unquestioning obedience. "This facility was declared destroyed 6 months ago. You are operating an illegal research station in restricted space. The facility is private property, legally purchased and registered with the Colonial Development Authority," Marcus replied calmly. "All permits are current and available for review." Thorne's expression suggested she was unimpressed with legal technicalities. "Dr. Chen, my sensors are detecting massive biosignatures consistent with predatory species. You're harboring dangerous wildlife without proper containment or council oversight." This was the moment Marcus had been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. Everything he and Sarah had worked toward came down to the next few minutes. He could lie, try to misdirect the Admiral's attention, buy time for the dragons to hide deeper in the station. Or he could trust in the impossible thing they had accomplished together. "Admiral, I would like to introduce you to Scout," Marcus said. Stepping slightly aside, Scout moved forward with careful, deliberate grace. The young dragon had grown considerably since Marcus first found the hatchlings, but was still small enough to seem more curious than threatening. Its scales had settled into formal patterns that Sarah had identified as diplomatic courtesy, deep blues and silvers that conveyed respect and peaceful intentions. Admiral Thorne's hand moved instinctively toward her sidearm, but she stopped when Scout performed a precise military salute, a gesture the dragon had learned by watching archived footage of human ceremonies. "Greetings, Admiral Thorne," Scout said in carefully modulated English. "I am Scout, speaking for the young dragons of this place. We request conversation with Council representative." The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear the subtle hum of the station's life support systems. Admiral Thorne stared at Scout with the expression of someone whose fundamental understanding of the universe had just been challenged. "It talks," one of the security officers whispered. "I talk," Scout corrected politely. "I think, I choose. Other young dragons talk and think and choose also. We choose peacemaking with star people." Admiral Thorne found her voice, though it carried a tremor that hadn't been there before. "Dr. Chen, you are harboring 43 juvenile dragons. According to Galactic Council Resolution 447, that constitutes a Class Alpha extinction threat. I am authorized to implement immediate sterilization protocols." "Admiral," Marcus said, his heart hammering against his ribs, "I request formal diplomatic consideration under Article 12 of the Galactic Accords. These dragons are demonstrating sapience, language, and cultural development. They qualify for protection as an emerging civilization." Scout stepped forward again, its scales shifting to patterns that somehow conveyed both vulnerability and determination. "Admiral Thorne, may Scout ask question?" Thorn looked like she was watching a particularly vivid nightmare, but she nodded. Why do Council Star people choose bad fire for young dragons? Young dragons choose no war. Young dragons learn peace words, sharing ways, helping work. Why must young dragons die for old dragon anger? The question cut through military protocol and political expedience like a blade. Admiral Thorn had spent decades fighting dragon raids, had seen entire colonies reduced to ash and bone, had watched good soldiers die screaming in dragon fire. But she had never been asked to justify those actions by one of the creatures she'd sworn to eliminate. Because adult dragons are destroyers, she said finally. They have killed millions of innocent people. They recognize no law but violence. Scout's scales darkened with what Marcus had learned to recognize as deep sadness. Scout knows about Mother Voice teachings. Mother Voice said Star people were killers of dragon children. Mother Voice said Star people make sky homes into dead places. Mother Voice taught fear and anger in striking first. The young dragon paused, seeming to gather its thoughts. But Scout learned different truth from Marcus teacher and Sarah teacher. Learned that Star people can choose kindness paths. Maybe Mother Voice wrong about Star people. Maybe Star people wrong about dragons. Admiral Thorn looked around the landing bay, noting the careful modifications Marcus had made. The life support systems designed for multiple species. The obvious signs that this was a place of care rather than captivity. Even if you're not hostile now, she said, her voice less certain than before, you will grow larger, stronger. Your instincts will change. How can you guarantee that you won't become like your elders? Scout made a sound that Marcus had learned was dragon laughter. Not mockery, but genuine amusement at the complexity of existence. Admiral Thorn cannot guarantee human children will not become criminals or war makers. But Admiral chooses to believe in good possibilities, teaches children better ways. Scout and clan siblings ask for same chance. Before Admiral Thorn could respond, Scout raised its head and produced the complex call that had summoned the dragons before. This time the response was immediate and overwhelming. Dragons emerged from every corridor, every level of the station, not in a threatening rush, but in carefully organized groups that demonstrated their social sophistication. The smallest dragons came first, their scales bright with curiosity and hope. They arranged themselves in a protective cluster around Scout, but their body language was open and welcoming. Behind them came the adolescents, larger but still obviously young, their movements careful and deliberate to avoid seeming aggressive. Admiral Thorn's security detail tensed, weapons half raised, but their commander held up a restraining hand. Whatever she had expected to find on this station, it wasn't this. A community of intelligent beings whose every action spoke of cooperation and restraint. One of the smallest dragons, barely larger than a house cat, approached Admiral Thorn directly. Its scales were a soft lavender shot through with silver, and it moved with the fearless curiosity of the very young. When it reached the Admiral's boots, it sat back on its haunches and offered something in its tiny claws. Admiral. Thorn looked down to find a small flower made of twisted wire and colored crystals, clearly crafted by claws that were still learning fine motor control, but unmistakably created as a gift. For Star Person Leader, the little dragon said in a voice like wind chimes, welcome gift for station home. Admiral Thorn stared at the offered flower for a long moment. Around her, 42 other dragons waited with patient hope, their scales reflecting the station's lights in patterns of peace and possibility. When she finally reached down to accept the gift, her hand was shaking. Dr. Chen, she said without taking her eyes off the small dragon, I think we need to have a much longer conversation, and I think I need to contact the council immediately. Scout's scales brightened with cautious optimism. Council will listen to new truth about dragons? Admiral Thorn looked around at the impossible scene surrounding her. Young dragons offering gifts, speaking of peace, choosing cooperation over the violence that had defined their species for centuries. I don't know, she admitted. But Scout, I promise that I will try to make them listen. And I promise that no bad fire will fall on this station while we're talking. It wasn't a guarantee of safety, but it was hope. And for creatures attempting the impossible, hope was enough to build a future on. The emergency council session convened in the secure chambers of Titan Station, the most heavily defended facility in council space. Representatives from 47 worlds attended either in person or through quantum-encrypted hololinks, their faces showing the strain of making decisions that could reshape galactic civilization. Admiral Thorne stood before the assembled delegates, her formal uniform pristine, her expression carefully neutral. Behind her, a massive holographic display showed the research station on Kepler 438b, where Scout and the other young dragons waited for the galaxy to decide their fate. "Honored delegates," Admiral Thorne began, her voice carrying the weight of 4 decades in service, "I am here to present evidence that challenges our fundamental understanding of the dragon threat." The murmur of voices that rippled through the chamber was not encouraging. Counselor Vex of the Centauri Union, whose home system had lost 3 colonies to dragon attacks, spoke first. "Admiral, with respect, there is no evidence that could justify preserving creatures whose species has committed genocide across 17 star systems. The dragon protocols exist for good reason." "I understand your position, Counselor," Admiral Thorne replied. 6 months ago, I would have agreed completely. But I have seen something that changes everything." The holographic display shifted to show footage from her visit to the research station. The assembled delegates watched in stunned silence as Scout approached Admiral Thorne, offered formal greetings, and engaged in complex diplomatic discourse. The camera captured every detail: the dragon's careful body language, its obvious intelligence, the way it consulted with its companions before making important statements. "The creature displays learned behaviors," Counselor Vex insisted, though his voice lacked its previous certainty. "Mimicry is common among intelligent predators." "This goes far beyond mimicry," Admiral Thorne responded. "Scout and the other young dragons have developed their own cultural practices, their own social structures, their own ethical frameworks. They are not simply imitating human behavior. They are creating dragon civilization." The display changed again, showing the dragons in their daily activities: collaborative problem-solving, artistic expression using crystalline materials, even primitive writing systems developed independently of human influence. The delegates watched as young dragons cared for their smaller companions, shared resources equitably, and resolved conflicts through discussion rather than violence. Counselor Yamato of New Tokyo raised a trembling hand. "Admiral, even if these particular dragons show peaceful tendencies now, how can we guarantee they will remain peaceful as they mature? Adult dragons are exponentially more powerful than juveniles." Admiral Thorne had been expecting this question. It was the core of every delegate's fear. "Counselor, no species can guarantee the behavior of all its members. Humans have produced saints and monsters, sometimes within the same family. The question is not whether these dragons might become dangerous, but whether they deserve the chance to prove they can choose differently than their predecessors." The chamber erupted in heated debate. Some delegates argued for immediate sterilization, citing the massive death tolls from previous dragon encounters. Others advocated for careful study under maximum security. A few, led by the representative from the academic consortium, suggested that the dragons represented an unprecedented opportunity for peaceful contact with humanity's oldest enemy. Senator Morrison of Earth, the most senior delegate present, called for order. "Admiral Thorne, what exactly are you proposing? We cannot simply release 43 dragons into civilized space and hope for the best." "I am proposing a supervised integration program," Admiral Thorne said, her words sending shockwaves through the assembly. "A carefully monitored process that allows these dragons to develop while maintaining appropriate safeguards for galactic security." "Supervised by whom?" Counselor Vex demanded. "Who has the expertise to manage such a program? Who has the authority to make life or death decisions about an entire species?" Admiral Thorne straightened to her full height, her expression resolute. "Dr. Marcus Chen has demonstrated more success in interspecies relations than any xenobiologist in the galaxy. His facility is equipped for long-term monitoring and containment if necessary, and most importantly, he has already earned the trust and cooperation of the dragons themselves." The holographic display shifted one final time, showing Scout addressing the camera directly. The young dragon's scales were set in formal patterns, its posture dignified despite its relative youth. "Council delegates," Scout said in carefully modulated speech, "young dragons understand fear reasons for ending our lives. Mother-voiced dragons brought much pain to star people, but young dragons choose different path. We offer proof-making through time and good choices. We ask for chance to show that dragons can be peacemakers instead of warbringers." The simplicity and sincerity of the appeal cut through hours of political debate. Here was a creature whose species had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, asking not for mercy but for the opportunity to earn redemption through actions. Counselor Vex was the first to break the silence that followed. And if this experiment fails? If even one of these dragons turns aggressive? Scout's image responded with the patience of someone who had expected this question. Then Scout and clan siblings accept responsibility for failure. But if experiment succeeds, if young dragons prove peace-choosing is possible, then maybe old hatreds can end. Maybe Galaxy can have dragon friends instead of dragon enemies. Senator Morrison leaned forward in his chair, his ancient eyes bright with possibility. Admiral Dr. Chen, what specific safeguards are you proposing for this program? Admiral Thorne activated a new display showing detailed facility schematics and monitoring protocols. Continuous behavioral assessment, regular council inspections, embedded security systems capable of containment or neutralization if necessary. The dragons would remain on Kepler 438b under Dr. Chen's supervision until they reach maturity and demonstrate consistent peaceful behavior. And if they successfully complete the program, asked Counselor Yamato, then we face a choice that could define the next 1,000 years of galactic history, Admiral Thorne replied. We can choose to continue the cycle of violence that has defined human-dragon relations, or we can choose to believe that intelligence and goodwill can triumph over fear and tradition. The debate that followed lasted for 18 hours. The dragons waited patiently on their distant world, while the galaxy's leaders struggled with questions that had no easy answers. In the end, the vote was closer than anyone had expected. 24 in favor of the integration program, 21 opposed, with 2 abstentions. Senator Morrison's deciding vote came with a statement that would be remembered for generations. In my 90 years of service, I have seen what fear and hatred can accomplish. Perhaps it is time to discover what hope and courage might achieve. As the council session ended and the delegates departed, Admiral Thorne activated a secure communication link to Kepler 438b. Marcus and Sarah appeared on her screen, with Scout visible between them. The council has approved a provisional integration program, Admiral Thorne announced. You have 5 years to prove that peaceful dragons are possible. The galaxy will be watching. Scout's scales brightened with patterns of joy and determination. 5 years to make new truth about dragons. 5 years to build bridges instead of walls. Young dragons will not waste this gift chance. Admiral Thorne found herself smiling, something she hadn't done much of during her military career. No, Scout, I don't think you will. As the communication ended, Admiral Thorne looked out at the stars and wondered if she had just witnessed the beginning of a new age, or the prelude to galactic catastrophe. Either way, the impossible had become possible, and 43 young dragons had 5 years to prove that the future could be different from the past. 5 years later, Marcus stood in the main auditorium of the Kepler research station, watching as Scout adjusted the holographic projector with delicate precision. The dragon had grown tremendously, now standing nearly 3 meters tall with wings that spanned twice that when fully extended. But despite its imposing size, Scout moved with the same careful grace it had shown as a hatchling, mindful of the smaller beings sharing its space. The auditorium was filled with delegates from across the galaxy, scientists, diplomats, and military observers who had come to witness the conclusion of the most ambitious interspecies integration program in galactic history. Admiral Thorne sat in the front row, her hair now silver with age but her eyes still sharp with intelligence. Honored guests, Scout began, its voice now a rich bass that resonated through the chamber. 5 years ago, young dragons asked for chance to prove peace-choosing was possible. Today we present results of that choosing. The holographic display activated, showing statistical data that represented thousands of hours of observation and analysis. Not a single aggressive incident among the 43 dragons. No territorial disputes, no violence, no behavior patterns that suggested the legendary dragon rage that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. Numbers tell one story, Scout continued, but dragons prefer different truth-sharing. The display changed, showing scenes from the dragons' daily lives over the past 5 years. The audience watched as the dragons had developed their own communities, their own art forms, their own contributions to the station's scientific research. They saw dragons caring for injured wildlife from the crystal forests, developing new technologies that combined dragon instincts with human engineering, creating music that touched something primal in the souls of every listener. But most importantly, they saw dragons making choices. When conflicts arose, choosing discussion over dominance. When resources were scarce, choosing sharing over hoarding. When fear threatened to overwhelm reason, choosing trust over retreat. The Council's greatest concern, Admiral Thorne said as she rose to address the assembly, was what would happen as these dragons reached maturity. Would they retain their peaceful nature, or would ancient instincts resurface? Scout's companion, a magnificent dragon whose scales shifted between deep crimson and golden bronze, stepped forward. This was Flamesinger, once the smallest of the hatchlings, now grown into one of the most articulate speakers of the group. Ancient instincts do surface, Flamesinger acknowledged, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in listeners' bones. Dragon nature includes territorial drives, protective aggression, dominance hierarchies. These things are part of what we are. A murmur of concern rippled through the audience, but Flamesinger raised a wing for attention. But dragon nature also includes choice-making, learning paths, pack bonding with other species. Humans focus on violent dragon nature and forget cooperative dragon nature. We choose which nature to follow. Dr. Sarah Martinez, now bearing the title of Director of Interspecies Relations, activated another display. Over the past year, as the dragons reached physical maturity, we documented several incidents where their territorial instincts were activated. Unauthorized ships entering their perceived territory, threats to their community, situations that would have triggered violent responses from wild dragons. The display showed footage of these incidents. A dragon intercepting a smuggler's ship that had bypassed the station's security perimeter, but choosing to escort the vessel to authorities rather than destroy it. Dragons defending their territory from a predatory pack of crystal stalkers, but using minimal force and providing medical care to injured attackers afterward. In every case, Dr. Martinez continued, the dragons chose restraint over violence, protection over predation. They have proven that intelligence can overcome instinct, that choice can triumph over nature. Counselor Vex, who had opposed the program from the beginning, stood with obvious reluctance. Dr. Martinez, these dragons have lived in artificial conditions, isolated from the stresses that drive wild dragon behavior. How can we be certain they will maintain these peaceful tendencies when exposed to the broader galaxy? Scout and Flamesinger exchanged a look. A complex communication that the humans had learned indicated serious consideration. When Scout turned back to the assembly, its scales had shifted to patterns that Dr. Martinez recognized as formal truth-telling. Counselor Vex asks important question, Scout acknowledged. Station life is protected life, safe life. Real galaxy has dangers, competitions, species that may not choose peace paths. Dragons cannot promise perfect peace in imperfect galaxy. The honesty of the admission sent a chill through the audience. But Scout wasn't finished. But dragons can promise to choose peace-seeking first, violence only when all other paths are closed. Dragons can promise to protect innocent ones, to build instead of destroy, to teach young dragons better ways than old dragon wars. Flamesinger stepped forward to join Scout. Dragon people ask for what star people have always had, chance to prove worth through actions, not fear through reputation, chance to build future different from past. Admiral Thorne rose from her seat, her voice carrying the authority of decades in service. 5 years ago, I recommended this program despite my own fears and doubts. Today, I stand before you to say that these dragons have exceeded every expectation, challenged every assumption, and proven that redemption is possible even for species written off as irredeemably hostile. She paused, looking around the assembly with eyes that had seen too much war and were finally witnessing the possibility of lasting peace. I recommend full integration status for the Kepler dragons, with authorization to establish diplomatic relations between dragon and human communities. It is time to end the longest war in galactic history. The vote was unanimous. As the delegates filed out, already planning the complex logistics of interspecies integration, Marcus found himself alone with Scout in the now empty auditorium. The dragon looked thoughtful, its scales cycling through patterns of satisfaction mixed with uncertainty. Nervous about the future? Marcus asked. Scout's expression, learned from years of watching humans, was wryly amused. Marcus teacher, Scout has spent 5 years learning that futures are made by choices, not promises. Dragons choose to make good future. Every day, every decision, every interaction with star people. Choice-making never ends. Marcus smiled, thinking about the impossible journey that had brought them to this moment. No, it doesn't. But Scout, I think you and your family are going to make excellent choices. Scout's scales brightened with affection and gratitude. Scout thinks humans make good choice too 5 years ago. Choose hope instead of fear. Choose bridge building instead of wall making. As they walked together toward the station's observation deck, where the other dragons were celebrating with complex aerial dances among the crystal formations, Marcus reflected on the truth Scout had spoken. The galaxy was about to discover what was possible when intelligence chose compassion over fear, when hope proved stronger than hatred, when the impossible became inevitable through the simple act of believing that tomorrow could be different from yesterday. The age of dragon wars was ending. The age of dragon partnership was about to begin, and it had all started with one human wrangler who stumbled upon baby dragons and decided to attempt the impossible.